Back in June of 2024, I launched a series of polls in which my subscribers participated in order to determine which was the best 21 Pilots song of all time. After all the voting was over and the polls were closed, the winner was determined to be the second track off of Vessel, Holding On to You. The lead single off of Trench, Jumpsuit, took second place, followed closely by Trees in third. In September, I made a video looking at the results of this poll, walking through the top 10 songs and analyzing a breakdown by album. Now, it is time to look at the 10 worst songs, according to the results of this poll. It should be noted here that these were determined by those who participated in the polling competition and do not necessarily reflect my own personal view on which songs by 21 Pilots are the worst. The ranking of these songs is numbered from 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst song and 10 being the 10th worst song. And in that 10th place is a song off of Regional at Best, which surprisingly only had a few songs ranked in this top 10. In fact, there were only 2 off of that album. And I do not say surprisingly because I believe Regional Best is a bad album, or that I think most people consider it to be a bad album, or that most people dislike it. But over the past year or so, I've noticed that many people rank that album as the lowest when looking at all of 21 Pilots albums taken together and ranked by collection. And largely that is due to the lower quality in the production on this album, which makes sense. It wasn't done in a studio in the same way as their later ones were. They didn't have producers working with them in the same way as they do now, such as Paul Meany. And obviously they were much earlier along in their music career, so that level of technicality might not have been there. And it clearly isn't. You can hear that in those songs. However, that doesn't detract from the fact that they are good songs. They're well written. They have good sound. They have good lyrics. But I was expecting that more people were going to determine that songs off of that collection didn't deserve to rank very high, and that most of them were going to end up in the bottom 10. Also, maybe in part due to the fact that not everyone has listened to Regional Best. Now, I certainly hope that everyone who participated in this poll and voted against or for songs off of Regional Best had heard those songs, but that's not a guarantee. And statistically speaking, when you look at the fan base of 21 Pilots as a whole, I don't think the majority, well, maybe the majority, but I certainly wouldn't say that the vast majority or every single person who listens to 21 Pilots or is interested in voting on which song by 21 Pilots they think is the best has necessarily heard everything off of Regional Best. But this song in 10th place, Ruby, is off of that album, and it is track 11 on the collection. And it is not one of those songs which was ever brought over into the Vessel album or ever used as a bonus track, as far as I'm aware. Maybe in some obscure version of the album it was, but I don't believe it ever was. And I certainly wouldn't say that Ruby is one of my least favorite songs off of Regional Best. Now, to be fair, when looking at 21 Pilots' discography as a whole, and looking at ranking all of their songs, those that get pushed to the bottom 10, are not necessarily considered to be bad songs in and of themselves. They're just worse than the other 92 songs which were involved in this polling. But even with that being said, I do think there are some other songs in Regional Best which I may have ranked lower myself. For instance, the Regional at Best version of Trees is significantly worse than the Vessel version, and unlike some of the other songs which were also carried over to Vessel, is not unique enough to be interesting to listen to, or unique enough that it's good in its own right, even though it's different to the Vessel version. Really, the version on Regional Best is just objectively worse than the Vessel version. And so it's probably my least favorite on that album because it doesn't add anything new that you don't get in that next one, and it's not one of the best songs on that album anyway, regardless of whether or not it was brought over and reworked and improved on in Vessel. In 9th place is a song off of Blurryface, Doubt. Now, I was surprised by this, but I also wasn't. I have often seen that people seem to dislike Doubt for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. It's always been one of my favorite songs off of Blurryface. Not the best, but not the worst. And Certainly, I'd say top 6. And it would rank in probably the top 20 or 30 songs by 21 Pilots overall. So I have been surprised over the years that so many people seem to dislike this song so much. But because I was aware of that, I wasn't entirely surprised that it did end up as the 9th worst song by the band. Now, I have seen people mention that perhaps the chorus or just the sound of the song overall is a bit too mainstream, perhaps, a bit too pop sounding in a weird way. I don't know. I always like it, I always enjoy it. I like the lyricism a lot, but I can understand why what they did with the chorus in terms of sound might not be everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. But I didn't think it was going to be 9th. In 8th place is a song off of Vessel, House of Gold. I can sort of see why this one wasn't necessarily the highest ranked, and I do think it's not one of my favorites off of Vessel, although I do enjoy listening to it. When I do listen to it, I don't actually go out of my way to listen to it all that much. And as I think I mentioned a moment ago, when you're ranking 21 Pilots songs, you have to remember that so many of them are so good, and a good number of them, or most of them, if not all of them, are quite good, that even those which rank the lowest are still enjoyed by a lot of people and still actually good songs in and of themselves. They're just perhaps worse than everything else. So if there are any people out there who love House of Gold, as I'm sure there are, don't be discouraged by the fact that it was an 8th worst song overall. In 7th place is a song off of Scaled and Icy, which arguably is considered to be the most hated album by 21 Pilots. Perhaps hated is a strong word, but generally people seemed to be disappointed and still do, although I think a lot of people have let the album grow on them over time, particularly when Clancy came out and they were able to see that Skilled and Icy is a self-contained thing. That sound that we got in that album isn't necessarily continuing into every single album, although it may return in the future as they have mentioned in the past. So my impression nowadays is that for the vast majority of people, they either quite enjoy Skilled and Icy or tolerate it and don't actually dislike it quite as harshly as they used to, but it's become such a known thing that people do dislike this album that everyone still assumes most people dislike it. They'll ask, why does everyone dislike this album? And everyone responds by saying, well, I don't dislike it. It must be everyone else. So. And I'm sure there are still pockets of people who do strongly dislike this album, but I think the majority of people don't hate it the way they used to, if they ever did fully hate it. However, with that being said, I'm not surprised that Saturday did end up in the top 10 or the bottom 10. I suppose I should remember to say. But just like with Regional Best, there were only 2 songs off of Skilled and Icy which made it into the bottom 10, which was a bit surprising. Speaking of Regional Best, in 6th place is the other song off of that album, Be Concerned. This is the 13th track off of that album and featured a musician or rapper by the name of Joseph, who also, I believe, was featured on another project which Tyler Joseph did separate from 21 Pilots, maybe even before forming 21 Pilots, a short song called Dollhouse. But this song is quite good. I can understand why it might not be someone's top song off of Regional Best. I don't actually dislike it all that much. It's one of my favorites of the songs which were not carried over into Vessel, because it's easy to kind of split Regional Best into 2 sections. There's the 6 songs which made it onto Vessel, and then there's the 9 which remained and never actually made it over. Or I suppose I should say 9 and 5, because technically speaking, House of Gold was never on Regional Best. That's become kind of misconstrued over time. It was considered a bonus track because, if my memory serves me, it was a newsletter or newsletter subscriber special along with the song 2. It was kind of a bonus track in that way, but it wasn't ever on the physical CD or that album collection officially. But regardless, Be Concerned definitely is one of the 9 which didn't make it onto Vessel. And I think with good reason. I don't think it would have really fit what they were doing with that 3rd album, but I think it's a good song in and of itself, and one which I believe gets overlooked quite often. But perhaps lyrically you can make the argument it's not quite as deep as some of the other songs which they've done, or even other songs on Regional Best. And then in 5th place is a song which I do not believe deserves to be ranked so low. Christmas Saves the Year. Now, I do understand this song is a very seasonal one, and so if you're looking at 21 Pilots songs as a whole, you may rank ones which can only really be listened to a couple months out of every year as lower on the ranking of all things, but it's a very good song in and of itself. It's a great Christmas song. It's very rare that I appreciate non-traditional Christmas songs from modern day contemporary artists. I'll listen to them sometimes if it's a band I really like, but most of the time they don't become a regular staple of my Christmas experience, if you will. But Christmas Saves the Year definitely did, because it's very well done. It captured what a lot of people were feeling in the time it was written, but also does so in a way which not only speaks to that moment in history, but also is applicable to many Christmases before and after, and really touches upon something which a lot of people might experience around Christmas or other holidays. So, yes, it is seasonal. I don't think many people really go out of their way to listen to this song in June or July, and therefore it's probably not many people's favorite song by 21 Pilots, or even top 10, but to consider it the fifth worst song of all time is perhaps a bit unjustified in my mind. In fourth place is the first song we've seen off of the self-titled album. My impression of people's relationship with the self-titled album is that they either really love it or they kind of dislike it. And I think the same applies to the individual songs off of that album. There are some which people really, really like, think play a very strong role, and I agree, play a very strong role in terms of the Demas storyline, in terms of lore, in terms of symbolism, which we see reappearing throughout the rest of their music and videos. And then there are some songs which those people who really enjoy songs like Fall Away or Isle of Flightless Birds or Trapdoor really dislike off of the album and don't ever enjoy listening to. I'd say personally, I don't fully agree with that sentiment. I often enjoy listening to self-titled all the way through. But to be fair, when I'm going to listen to a couple of individual songs off of the album without sitting down and listening to it in its entirety, this song, O Misbeliever, is one which I often skip. It is a good song, as many of the songs off of self-titled are, but it isn't one of the best in that collection, so I wasn't terribly surprised that it made it into fourth. And then in third place is a single which they released, I believe, after Heathens, and it was originally a song by My Chemical Romance, which 21 Pilots did a cover of, the song Cancer. Now, I am not in any way surprised that this ranked as low as it did. I included it in the polling as a whole because it is a unique enough cover and important enough cover, I suppose, that they include it in their official discography. It's on Spotify, I assume on Apple Music and other listening platforms like that. So it seemed to be officially recognized enough and also a unique enough take on that song that it was worth including in this competition as a whole. But I wasn't expecting it to take any of the top rankings, so I wasn't surprised that it ended up down here towards the bottom. And then in second place is the second worst song by 21 Pilots of all time, is another song off of Skilled and Icy, Bounce Man. Now, I definitely agree that for most people, this is not their favorite song off that album. But when the album first came out, this was one of the ones which first jumped out to me, and was one of the first which I listened to again. Now, over time, I haven't returned to it quite as much as I have to other songs like No Chances or Redecorate or even Shy Away. But is it really the second worst song by 21 Pilots of all time? I'd say no, but everyone else seems to say yes, so there you go. And then, in first place, or shall I say, in last place, after thousands of votes were cast, the song which made it all the way down to the bottom as the worst song by 21 Pilots of all time, Before You Start Your Day. It is the 13th track off of the self-titled album, comes just before Isle of Flightless Birds, and in many ways, I believe it to be the prequel to Isle of Flightless Birds, the first part of that song, especially because parts of Before You Start Your Day are repeated at the start of Isle of Flightless Birds. I don't think it's the worst song by the band of all time. I don't think it's the worst song off of self-titled. But in fairness, I think it's the song I listen to the least by this band. But I do think it's very good. I think it's a very well done song. I think it's a kind of hauntingly beautiful song. Sort of peaceful and calm, but also somber and full of a tenseness that's hard to describe. I don't know. That's just my read. But what do you think? Do you think this song deserved to be ranked as the worst song by 21 Pilots? And if not, which song do you think should be in that slot? Obviously, these bottom 10 was determined by where they fell on the ranking after everyone had voted for what they thought to be the best song. So I thought it was interesting to kind of look at how that worked out. Would the results have been different if everyone had intentionally been voting for what is the worst song and been casting votes and weighing the different options in terms of which one do I like less and voting for that one instead of which one do I like more? I don't know. When you have two songs side by side and you choose one as the one you like better, you are necessarily choosing that you like the other one less. So maybe the results would have been exactly the same. It's hard to say without conducting the exact same poll again, but backwards and using the exact same number of people. Otherwise, things are going to be a little bit different. But regardless, I thought it was interesting enough to see what these bottom 10 were and to share that with you. And if you have a different ranking of which 10 songs you think are the worst, feel free to include them in the comments. Also, as a bit of an aside, I will say I was surprised that the song Not Today didn't make it into these bottom 10 or even the bottom 20. In my understanding, it is widely regarded to be the worst song off of Blurryface, which I would be inclined to agree with. But instead, it ranked in 67th place. With that being said, thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me do a full ranking of all 21 Pilots songs according to my own personal preference or choice. And don't forget to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews. See you next Sunday.